Hello and welcome back to Dr. Logic Awkwardly Does Logic in her office. Today I'm going to talk about good Stoic arguments. So we know how to make individual lecta true or false. We do this via our interpretation or our truth value assignment that just says these lecta are true, these lecta are false. We've talked about how to form complex statements out of these lecta using negation, disjunction, conjunction, and implication. And we've talked about what makes the complex statements true on the basis of the truth values of the parts that they have. So the next thing that we need to do is talk about, well, what happens when we combine all of these together to get arguments? Which arguments are going to be good arguments and which are not? Despite all of the differences between the Stoic approach to logic and the Aristotelian approach to logic, they have the same definition of goodness of argument. An argument is good, or valid, if every interpretation that makes the premises true also makes the conclusion true. Exactly the same. Our notion of interpretation has differed. What can count as premise or conclusion differs, but the definition of good argument doesn't change. Now, when we looked at the syllogistic, we introduced axioms, we had some transformation rules, we had this notion of proof. There isn't really that, at least not at the same level of development with the Stoic approach. However, the Stoics did identify, just as Aristotle highlighted out Barbara, Celerent, Dari, and Ferrio as the four perfect axioms that didn't need any proof. The Stoics highlighted 5 different forms of argument that they took as being undemonstrated. They are basic. They are ones where, again, looking at them and using what you know about truth and falsity and the truth values for the complex sentences, you can tell that these are going to be good arguments. And then the idea is that more complex arguments are just going to be taking the basic ones and kind of fitting them together as little puzzle pieces. So what might be the conclusion of one argument could be the premise of another argument of a different form. And so you can construct complex arguments out of the basic undemonstrated arguments. So let's talk about what are these undemonstrated arguments. So there we are. I've got them written down here in the way that they are described in the Stoic literature. So the first one is, if the first, then the second, the first, therefore the second. So the first 2 sentences, this is awkward, if the first, then the second, and the first are the premises of the argument, and the thing following, therefore, is the conclusion. Number 2, if the first, then the second, not the second, therefore not the first. So number 3 is then not both the first and the first, therefore not the second. Number 4, either the first or the first, and therefore not the second. And then number 5, either the first or the second, not the first, therefore the second. A couple of things to say about these logical forms of argument. These are not like arguments themselves. There aren't really any sentences going on here. But take a look at this one. So in this here we have either the first or the second. The first, therefore not the second. The only way that this argument form is going to be a good one is if we take exclusive disjunction. So I talked about this in a previous video, pointing out that for the Stoics, a disjunction is true if exactly one of the disjuncts is true. That's crucial for making this a good argument form. If you drop the exclusivity requirement, this one is not going to be a good one anymore. All the other ones still will be, but you just have to kind of like draw the line through 4. We don't want 4. The other thing to say about these is the fact that we are using these kind of placeholder pointer things, the first, the second. These should be understood as essentially indexicals that are pointing to sentences, or they are places in which you could put sentences. So these can either be lecta or they could be more complex sentences themselves. So this is, in a sense, a first step towards kind of taking ordinary natural language arguments and abstracting away to their form, in a similar way that we did with the syllogisms, where we had symbols for the terms in the copyleaf. This is a similar type of abstraction, it just doesn't use symbols. Now, as I said, you can take each of these basic arguments and you can combine them together into more complex arguments. We're probably not going to talk about that much here. This is something I usually give as a homework assignment because it's awfully cool. So if people are interested, give me a shout out. I can put some examples in the comments if you'd like to try your hand at combining Stoic arguments. But really at this point, I kind of want to draw back away from the Stoic account and start moving closer towards modern times, into the 20th and 21st centuries, and the modern development of propositional logic. Because what we will see is that all of these same sorts of components, the connectives, the importance of truth values, how truth values combine to give the truth values for more complex sentences, the four logical connectives, negation, conjunction, disjunction, implication, the focus on validity of arguments, the move towards this abstract approach to it. These are all things that both the Stoic account and the modern account have in common. So the Stoic account was fun because it allows us to see a little bit of the history of the development of logic, also as a transition point from Aristotle and the syllogistic into what we're going to be doing now. And I have to say, we are glossing over 1,500 years worth of logical history. If this were a series on the history of logic, then we would still have a huge amount of material to try to get through. This is more of an introduction to kind of modern approaches to symbolic logic with some history thrown in, though I may add some purely historical videos at some point. But don't think that nothing happened between Stoics and the 20th century, because that is totally not true. But we are now going to be moving into propositional logic, and starting in the next video, we will go back to the same sort of basic steps that we saw with the syllogistic. I will define you a language, I will define you a semantics, and then we will do some proof theory. So, I look forward to seeing you then. Cheers.